one of my favorite theorists. And as many of you know, I'm a historian of science, so I just live with theory. Claude Swanson understands the worlds in which we walk. That's because he's walked in many worlds. He's plagued by an Ivy League education. Claude took his training in physics at MIT and Princeton, which meant also that he had access to the kind of organizations that a career like that leads to. So Claude has had a career consulting with the United States government and large-scale organizations, and one of the beautiful things about the spiritual path is that we never know when we're going to turn into it. So Claude is consulting with the government, and what does that allow him to do? It allows him to experience remote viewing. And as Claude tells us often, direct experience is the kind of thing a theorist really enjoys. Claude understood from the depth of his experience in seeing the power of remote viewing that the physical theory he had been taught clearly needed to be modified. And one of the ways in which he began to modify it, which those of you who are familiar with his book, The Synchronized Universe, will note, and if you're not, I highly recommend it, is to turn to history and to raise interest in some old-fashioned ideas about the way the universe is interconnected. Pursuing those ideas, Claude is now looking both inward and outward and is enthusiastically embracing innovations in physical theory that are highly instructive to the endeavors that this community enjoys. So I know that you all will welcome Dr. Claude Swanson.
Thank you, Bert. I'm a little apprehensive about this lapel mic. Is it good in the back? Can you hear it okay? Is that good? Okay, I got 2 thumbs up, okay. I like to have something I can hold and see, but I discovered that I was challenged having something in my left hand and something in my right hand. It was the Gerald Ford syndrome of public speaking, and I didn't want to fall into that. So there's one slight modification of what Bernie just said. When I learned about remote viewing, it was sort of as a rumor. It was a whisper, and I didn't ever take part in the program in those days, but I heard enough to know that it was real, and it's one of those strange things that happen that all of us probably have experienced. Is the boggle factor, because you had this big education, a lot of training, you think you know how the universe works, and I had some questions, but when you hear something like that, all of a sudden you realize everything that you think you know is wrong, and you have to start finding out what you can believe in. So I've been through that, and so I understand why scientists have trouble doing it. So I'm talking today about torsion, which is the Russian name for subtle energy. That's a photograph of a device. They have subtle energy down to the point of technology at this point. And we'll go into, and no photographs, please, if you don't mind. This is my background, as Bernie just mentioned. MIT and Princeton, and I really thought I would get the answers to how the universe worked from that, and I found myself feeling empty at the end, as though this whole structure seemed like it was put in after the fact, after we have the experimental evidence, but it didn't seem like it really held together to me. It wasn't satisfying. So I kept looking for something, and when I heard about remote viewing, didn't I cut off there? I realized, okay, that's a clue. You can't really do unified field theory if you don't have all the data, if you don't know all the different ways the universe really behaves. So I began a frantic search to see what else I'd been told that was wrong, or hadn't been told about that was true. And that was a 20-year search. And these are just a few of the things. Of course, remote viewing, ESP, PK, long-range healing, psychotronics, out-of-body, near-death, all kinds of wonderful things that I've discovered, to my shock, are true, and therefore, as a physicist, it's my job to try to explain them. Of course, ESP, as we all know, the Princeton Pear Lab and other groups have done wonderful work to prove these phenomena are real. This is just a typical Gaussian curve that kind of shows that the average person doesn't do really well at remote viewing, but there's a hump on the upper side of the curve which says even for the average person, you get more rights than wrongs. And so when you put that into the large number of tests they've done, the odds are now trillions to one that remote viewing, ESP, psychokinesis are real. So it's about time for science to wake up and take it seriously. Robert John, who, here. Robert John, head of that Princeton Pear Lab and also head of the engineering department at Princeton, when I was there, has a quote. He sums it up pretty succinctly. All forces known to physics, like gravity, for example, diminish with distance. And no forces in physics operate freely across time like this. It's as if consciousness is somehow able to direct its influence directly across space and time. An understanding that poses a challenge to science. So these are all real phenomena. How can science explain it? And we have other data. This is some brainwave measurements that show that everyone knows at the subconscious level when they receive an ESP message. Our brainwaves show that we got the message, but our conscious mind is not aware of it for most of us. So that's where meditation, quieting the mind, hypnosis, other techniques help a lot to start to be aware of what we're receiving. We all have the basic machinery. So that's what I just said. It's widespread. We just have to learn. There are experiments showing that when people go out of body, that there's something real that goes out of body that you can measure. It's like an orb. It's like a ball of some kind of energy that's not a type that our current Western science understands. The Chinese did experiments with remote viewing where they had their viewers go out of body, essentially, try to read a Chinese character inside an envelope someplace else. When inside this envelope, they also had a sheet of X-ray film. And they found whenever the person was able to read the Chinese character, the film became exposed. It actually imprinted the Chinese character on the film. And that meant there's some kind of very special energy that was right there at the target, which was far away from where the observer was. So they had a direct measurement. It's been reproduced here in America using photomultiplier tubes, and they also got an effect. So when we go out of body, it's not that you just think you're out of body. There's something conscious that actually went someplace else. Back in the 70s, experiments were done in New York with Alex Tannhaus as the viewer, and they had a little box with a target. The target would keep changing over time. And when he was able to see the target correctly, it was booby-trapped. It had all kinds of devices around it to measure strange energies. And when he was seeing the target correctly, the little thing was going off crazy with little signals saying optical disturbances, mechanical disturbances. So his out-of-body form caused measurable effects. And the thing about this energy form is it can go through barriers while it carries consciousness with it. So it's not electromagnetism. It holds together like a ball. It's some other type of force that's not in Western science. It's been seen in orbs oftentimes, occasionally at the time of death, as a spherical energy form leaving the body. Stable structures of this type cannot be explained by current physics. It can be projected This is data from Qigong master Dr. Yan Jin. I'm probably mispronouncing it, I apologize. But he's one of the great Qigong masters who worked with physicists in China for many years. When he would do a Qi projection lecture, he would send Qi to different parts of the room. And the physicists set up lithium fluoride particle detectors around the room. And they found, you can see here, there's a small blue line horizontal about his waist level. That's the average number of counts in the room. When he projected Qi, you see the big lines 20 times greater. So they were measuring his Qi. He was definitely able to send it. Dr. Yan was also involved in other experiments with radioactive samples. This is americium 237, I think, or something. It's a radioactive material. It gives off decay. The little Geiger counter can count the number of counts. He went 1,900 kilometers away, and they said, okay, now increase the number of counts, or decrease the number of counts. He was able to do it. By Western science, that's impossible. We don't know how to do that. Even the Chinese physicists were embarrassed about the data because they knew that you're not supposed to be able to do this. So they were kind of afraid to even publish it. Long-range pranic healing has been shown definitively now in a number of studies. This is part of Joey Jones' study with pranic healing. And they expose HeLa cells to a large gamma dose that'll kill them, kill half of the cells in 24 hours. And then 24 hours later, they measure how many of the cells are still surviving. And there's a horizontal line in the middle. These are bars showing how many are still there. The line in the middle is 50%. The first bar says, in case of no healing, that's how many are still alive. However, if you send pranic healing to the cells, either before or after, or both before and after, you get more to survive, up to about 88%. And this was a 10-year experiment. Joey Jones did everything he could to make it the most accurate, repeatable experiment. He never got more than 88%. And something troubled him. He said, why isn't it more? Why isn't it not 100%? I mean, most of us would be thrilled with 88%, but why isn't that 100%? And one day the thought occurred, maybe it's karma. Maybe it's the karma of the cells. And so during the next healing experiments, while the pranic healing is going on, he has an assistant pick up the phone and call a charity and make a contribution to the charity with the intention that the good karma will go to the cells. And the survival rate went from 88 to 96%. Yeah. And this has been reproduced now 100 times. So karma is real, and it's now been proven. So, so watch out. There's also a wonderful long-range healing data from Qigong masters. This is data from Master Jixing Lee with John Neely from the University of Pennsylvania on the scientific end, 2,000-mile projection. He had cancer cells in incubators in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Master Lee had a dramatic effect on the growth of the cancer cells. The little lines that are growing exponentially are the controls. The little lines that go up and then go down again are the ones where he was treating the cells. Master Lee had never been to Hershey, Pennsylvania, never been to the lab, and Neely actually had cancer cells in dishes in different parts of the same incubator. And Lee was able to target the specific dishes he was told to target. So how can we explain this? When I started collecting my data, after about 10, 15 years of beginning to form an idea of how this might work and put together lots of information about evidence, I wrote Synchronized Universe that kind of summarizes best evidence and proposes the beginnings of a model. That was several years ago. And what came out for me was that the key ingredient is subtle energy. That's the piece that's unusual. That's what, when that's present, physics no longer behaves the way I learned in school that it's supposed to behave. Bill Tiller calls that raising the gauge. It means all of a sudden now Alice is in Wonderland and all kinds of strange things can happen. This energy is central to consciousness. Consciousness directs the energy. It also can affect consciousness. And of course, our physics has left out consciousness. 100 years ago, we decided that consciousness is essential to quantum physics because if you look at an experiment, you collapse the wave function and you change the behavior after that. Once they decided that, they never went back to consciousness. They didn't want to know any more about consciousness. And they try to keep it out of experiments. We don't look until the end of the experiment. And so there's kind of a phobia about consciousness, I think, in Western physics. But we can't continue that because now we're seeing that it can have a very strong effect on physics experiments. When a Qigong master or a healer begins his work, he often begins with a breathing exercise to build up the prana, to build up the qi in his body. That's often one of the things called pranayama, things like that. And this building up of the qi seems to be one of the key ingredients to be able to make the laws of physics act funny. In Russia, thank you, Thornton. In Russia, they call this same energy torsion. That's one name for it. And the difference there is that it has been investigated pretty much from a hard scientific point of view from the beginning. It was originally discovered by an astrophysicist, and it's had 50 years, pretty much 50 years of research in Russia, including government programs for a large part of that. At this point, they have fully developed equations. Gennady Shipov has written a couple of books with the equations for this energy, verification by many experiments, patents, and even industrial applications. So they're probably ahead of us, which is not surprising. Here's a quote by one of the Russian torsion scientists. From the late 80s until the late 90s, major experimental investigations were conducted that confirmed the theoretical predictions. It was established that torsion generators allow us not only to replicate all the phenomena demonstrated by so-called psychics, but they are able to demonstrate effects that were never demonstrated by any psychic. So they have a wide variety of phenomena they've been able to investigate, including well-known psychic phenomena and things that are new. One of these scientists describes the applied research he was doing in 1991. He says there was a coordination of 8 scientific teams and 30 years of research, which culminated in his effort. He also says at the present time, we have created industrial prototypes of powerful emitters of negative energy, which is their name for left-handed torsion, by means of the developed nanotechnologies. This emanation is able to magnetize graphite and organics and decrease radioactivity, which makes the Yan experiment I mentioned earlier significant, influence oncology diseases like cancer. The time reverse technology is realized in such devices. So they've been doing a lot of interesting stuff that we don't know too much about, and I've been doing my best to try to sort this through and pull together as much as I can of it and make sense out of it. So what is torsion? Am I getting a... Nikolai Kozyrev, an astrophysicist, very brilliant man, in the 1950s came up with the idea of torsion and time density by watching how stars evolve. He watched double star systems, how they orbit each other. And his work was already well known in the late 1960s. If you go back and read Psychic Discoveries, Behind the Iron Curtain by Ostrander and Schroeder, 1970, one of the great classics. Probably most of you have a well-worn copy like I do. They spent a whole chapter interviewing Nikolai Kozyrev. He had some very intriguing things to say about the nature of time. And when I read it way back when, I just wanted to know more. It was so tantalizing, and he really seemed to have an understanding, but it's taken this long to be able to get enough information to be able to put together a bigger picture. One of the things he said is time is the most important and enigmatic property of nature. It's not propagated like light waves. It appears immediately everywhere. He also refers to his double star system, and what he says is that if one star is brighter than the other, or maybe a very different kind of star, they evolve and become very much like one another much faster than we can explain by astrophysics principles. He says, it's almost as if the stars communed by telepathy, he said with a grin. And so what happens is that they began looking into this phenomena of time, which is another name for torsion. He began discovering that actually it is connected with telepathy and the psychic properties. Here's a comment. I'm mentioning this part right now just because if you go on the web, you will find some smear stories about torsion. And so I want to make it clear that there's a lot of physicists in Russia have worked on it for a long time. In 1991, when Glasnost and Perestroika came out, a flood of papers came out. Now there seems to be an effort to discourage Westerners from looking into this stuff. So I think it's important to get a broad picture of how much evidence there is that this is a real phenomenon. Here is a quote by A.P. Levitch, a professor at Moscow University, a very respected scientist in Russia. He says, N.A. Kozyrev, an outstanding astronomer and natural scientist, enriched the dynamic picture of the world by introducing a new entity possessing active properties and coinciding with neither matter, nor field, nor space-time in its usual understanding. And Levitch edited an entire book collecting papers about Kozyrev's work. So this stuff is being accepted and being researched in Russia fairly seriously, while here in the West, people don't know what it is. There are a large number of experiments now that have indicated that they support, they're consistent with torsion, which is another name for Kozyrev's discovery. And I'll read this very quickly here. There's some hard physics, high-energy particle experiments that when you collide protons with protons, for example, at high energy, they don't behave the way people expected them to, but they do behave the way that the torsion model would have predicted. There's a whole bunch of different mentionings here. And I'm writing a book, which has become a big book, on trying to collect all this evidence together. At the present time, it's over 800 pages. In fact, the references are 80 pages. It's not quite finished, okay? I have an excerpt booklet. I put a booklet together of excerpts that'll be available after the talk if you want to know more about torsion. And this quote is in there. But the point is there's lots of hard scientific evidence to back it up. There have been internet attacks as well. Recently, Akimov was one of the leading Russian torsion scientists who worked very hard at trying to bring torsion to the West, get companies to implement commercialization. And he died 3 or 4 years ago, but if you go look up Akimov on the web, you'll get some big smear articles on the web recently. The other prominent person who is Shipov, Gennady Shipov, who is the theorist, who's produced most of the theory. And he also, his website now has so much attacking going on, it's hard to get through it, even see what he's saying nowadays. But I liked this quote by Konstantin Korotkov. If you know what the GDV is, you know, that measures your curly and images on your fingertips, he's really one of the top scientists in this general field. He had this little quote that I thought really summed up the picture. He says, from the very beginning, the science studying extrasensory abilities was a spiritual, idealistic movement. It radically undermined the basics of the materialistic theory of Marxism-Leninism. It maintained that apart from the physical cover of the material world, there was something else, something unknown. The opposition to paranormal studies proceeded in several ways. The public official way was that most prestigious and popular newspapers published slashing articles by leading professors, where it was claimed that it can't be true because it could never be true. Another method of opposition to paranormal studies was direct prohibition of any experiments in this sphere. And he goes on to say, except for the secret stuff. So, this is not new. In terms of trying to explain what torsion is, I'll give you 4 or 5 quick little pictures. One description is it's basically there's a twisting of space. In Einstein's equations, Einstein produced our current theory of gravity and the idea that space can curve. But in his picture, he kind of left out one aspect, which is that particles are not just points, not little round balls. They actually have spins. Electrons, protons, all the important particles have spins, which mean they have a spin axis, just like the Earth does. Einstein's equations don't really take that into account very well. What Shipov and the Russians have done since then is put that extra part in, and that means that space can have a twist to it, and that twist will affect the spins, and that's an important part that Western science right now is missing. And it means that when particles interact with one another by flipping their spins, they can have a much bigger effect than science had believed before. And that spin flipping is the essence of what torsion is. And that's, in essence, what they would say subtle energy is. Here are some equations just to show you that we have equations. This is Shipov's equations for the right-handed torsion field. There's two types of torsion, left-handed and right-handed, and they have different properties. Whenever a particle flips its spin, it generates a torsion wave. If it's in a round orbit and the orbit changes the plane, that'll also produce a torsion wave. What that means is that every time an electron generates light, generates electromagnetism or a photon, it also produces torsion. So torsion is really everywhere. And a lot of the devices, probably, that we've worked with that are healing devices that we think are electromagnetic, it might really be the torsion field they're producing that's having the effect. So it's important to make that distinction and try to go back and figure out how much is torsion, how much is electromagnetism. This is just a picture. When an electron is zipping up and down like this, making a light wave, at the ends of its path, when it reverses direction, it has to change its spin direction as well. And that spin flip is where the torsion gets produced. So it's a very important part of our physics all the time. It's a little bit weaker, maybe 10,000 times weaker than electromagnetism in most situations. So our physics has kind of left it out, overlooked it, hasn't really noticed it. At the quantum level, if you saw my book in the last chapter, I talk about how little particles at a very small scale, they can make little spin flips when they encounter a photon. Every time there's a spin flip, it'll also produce torsion or absorb torsion. So even at the quantum level and the subquantum level, torsion is really important. Another way of looking at what torsion is from the point of view that the vacuum is filled with energy. The 0-point energy is very important. It's a lot of it.